This is a detective, a private eye. He operates undercover. He has to produce evidence. And he often has informants with connections. The detective is trying to find out which country is next to impose capital controls. Capital controls. Can you imagine? No free movement of capital. No full convertibility of the currency. You can't get the funds out of the country. You're not allowed to buy property abroad. There is a red light, and that is the external debt of a country. When it's 50% or more as a percentage of the economy. And when most of that external debt is in a foreign currency, and when the currency is devaluing and this debt is going up and up, there is likelihood for capital controls. We could have a return of the system of capital controls in the world, which existed after World War II for more than 30 years. It was part of the Bretton Woods system. So you could use currency for trade, but not for capital movement. And in the 50s and 60s, the bankers didn't have a good name. They were blamed for the Great Depression in the 1930s. And then at the end of the 1970s, it was recognized that capital controls were very damaging for economic growth and for globalization. So we had a golden era in the 80s and 90s. But, of course, we had a few crises. We had the Latin American debt crisis in the 1980s. We had the Asia crisis in the 1990s. We had the Russia crisis in 1999. And then in 2008, we had the great financial crisis. And again, the tide has turned against the moneylenders. And the anti-globalizers are very keen to impose capital controls and to confiscate and tax the wealth of whoever still has wealth. Is the clock going to be turned back? Are we going back to the dark days of the 1970s again? We have a major crisis in emerging markets. Their commodity prices collapsed. Their currencies collapsed. And their external debt is rising ever faster. Major countries like Turkey and Malaysia have external debt of 70%, while their currencies declined 25% this year alone. Will you be able to get your money out? we will have the answer before long. Will the developed countries suddenly realize that they won't be able to have an independent monetary policy without capital controls? Can you imagine? No free movement of capital. No full convertibility of the currency. In the 1970s, the UK had capital controls that lasted 34 years. You couldn't get any money to take with you on holiday except a ridiculously low amount. You could not buy property abroad. And foreign firms would hesitate to invest in the UK, of course, in the 70s. It made no sense in a country with capital controls. So, the detective, the private eye, the investigator has to concede that the tide is turning. Even the IMF and the World Bank have admitted that capital controls can be a legitimate response for the sake of financial stability. Problem is, it's very hard to remove them. Once you impose these capital controls. So, the detective has to admit that the world is changing dramatically, that the golden era of finance is over. The golden era of globalization may be over. And the world will become much poorer. Much poorer. Thank you. Till next time.